Is prayer relevant? Before you answer with an indignant, of course, or chide me for some lack of faith, I want you to ask yourself the question, is prayer relevant to my life? And if so, why? Is prayer relevant to my life? And if so, why? If we're honest with ourselves, we often act as though the events at work or in the nation or in our families are more relevant to our lives than the time we spend every day in prayer. And if we act as though those events are more relevant to our lives than our prayer times, it's not because we're stupid. I mean, we readily recognize the way that a promotion at work or a family disagreement impact us, but the impact of prayer can be less readily apparent. I mean, we might go to prayer because we feel like praying is the right thing to do. Or we found that when we go to a time of prayer, we kind of come out feeling a bit more peaceful than when we started. But I mean, sometimes the impact of our prayer can seem kind of vague, just kind of, out there. And if push comes to shove, aren't all the other things we do, just kind of a bit more important than our prayer? Again, before you indignantly write me off, or ask yourself how in the world, a deacon could be asking this question, ask yourself whether prayer is relevant to your life, and if so, why? Now, each of us is going to answer that question differently. And some of us might recognize that prayer is relevant because Jesus has become such an intimate friend that we couldn't imagine a day going by where we don't talk with him, where we don't spend time with him. And others might recognize that prayer is relevant to our lives because we've seen intercession powerfully answered by God, and we need him to do it again. And for some of us, we might honestly recognize that prayer doesn't seem that relevant, and we don't fully know why we pray. And that's okay. Wherever we are in our prayer, Jesus wants to reveal himself to us and draw us close to himself, which is one of the key points in today's gospel. Jesus said, when you are invited to a wedding banquet, go and take the lowest place. Now, Jesus is certainly commanding us to demonstrate humility towards one another, but his words also apply to us every day in our prayer. He's calling us to go to our lowest place, our place of weakness, and meet him there. What do I mean by our lowest place? Well, right now, when I'm talking about it, I mean that wounded place of our heart that is most vulnerable to sin. Or that part of our heart where we haven't fully really forgiven ourselves for some deed in our past. Or that place in our heart where we need Jesus the most, but we don't want to let him in. And Jesus wants to come precisely to that place in our hearts because he longs to meet us in our loneliness, our weakness, and our frustration. He wants to bring freedom where there's slavery, light where there is darkness, and hope where there is discouragement and despair. And he yearns for us to experience the abundant life that he's promised us, but so often we prevent ourselves from experiencing that life because we refuse to allow him into our lowest place. But it's only when we allow Jesus into all of our sinful and wounded and broken places that we begin to experience his abundant life. It's only when we take the lowest place in our hearts that Jesus can exalt us and seat us next to himself at his banquet. And this reality isn't, just something, kind of way out there. This has been transformative for me in my own life. For example, there was a time in seminary, not that long ago, when my daily prayer, my daily holy hours went something kind of like this. I'd get up in the morning and go down for prayer, and I'd show up before Jesus in the Blessed Sacrament, and almost immediately, I would get distracted from prayer and start worrying about, who knows what, my studies, I don't know, whatever, something, and I'd be distracted for a while, and then I'd catch myself and be like, oh, Peter, what are you doing? Like, focus back on prayer, okay. And only to find myself, 10 minutes later, how did I get distracted all over again? And it just kind of cycled through that. And I would come to the end of my holy hour and be so frustrated because I feel like I had wasted basically the whole thing being distracted. And I could have, on my own, I would have stayed in that cycle of distraction and frustration and distraction and frustration. But Jesus eventually broke in. He showed me just how much he loved me, even in my worries and my distractions. He came to this lowly part of my heart, and he didn't scold me or try to fix me. Instead, he just persisted in coming to my lowest place and loving me. And as I chose little by little to accept his love, and as he just kept faithfully showing up in that place, my prayer began to change. When I got distracted, instead of getting frustrated and ashamed of myself, I turned to Jesus and showed him my littleness, showed him my distractions, and let him love me. And I could almost physically feel him enter the bottom of my heart and hold me in his love. And as a result, instead of becoming a place of separation, my distractions became a point of communion between myself and Jesus. And I let myself be loved precisely in my lowly place, precisely in my place of weakness and littleness. And as I went to the lowest part of my heart, Jesus began to raise me up to himself. And while it's just kind of one example, one small example from my life, Jesus wants to meet us all in all of our lowest places and draw us to himself. Now, to be clear, this is not a green light to just kind of pitch in the towel in prayer or our battle against sin. Rather, when we allow Jesus to enter the lowest part of our heart, we don't sit idly by or do what we want. Instead, we sit with Jesus in that place and let him love us. And sometimes his presence in that lowest place is immensely comforting because he's coming to us in our weakness and our brokenness. And sometimes his presence in that lowest place is immensely uncomfortable precisely because of our weakness and our brokenness. And it can be uncomfortable because in our weakness and our brokenness, we feel shame and fear and defensiveness in those places of our sin, in those places of our lowliness. And we would rather ignore, right? Sometimes we would rather ignore our anger, our lust, our pride, our attachment to money or our material goods. We would rather not have to deal with that difficult family situation and all the wounds that have come from it. We would rather try to forget about that past sin that just still seems to haunt us. In short, we wish that we could just ignore or fix all of our lowest places by ourselves and then just come to Jesus all neat and tidy. And we think that would be so good. The problem is, it doesn't work that way. It never works that way. We can't fix our weaknesses, and ignoring them only leads us to more pain. And Jesus is the only one who can heal us, and more often than not, he heals us by coming to our lowest place and loving us there. He enters that place and sits with us and loves us. And we might feel impatience or shame, but he just sits there and loves us. Remember, when he loved me in my distractions in prayer, he didn't just wipe them out. Instead, he showed me I was lovable precisely in my lowliness. He showed me that I was lovable even in my lowest place, and that reality, that love, was what brought me tremendous freedom. And that is how it works. When we allow Jesus to sit with us in our lowest places, we begin to become more and more convinced that he loves us. And we stop moving from a place of shame and frustration, and we begin moving from a place of love and security. Because if Jesus can love us in that lowly place, then we can be secure that he loves every part of our heart. And that is one major reason why prayer is relevant to our lives. Because when we encounter Jesus' love in our prayer, we stop living from shame and we start living from security. And we move from repeated sinfulness to being transformed by his merciful love. And since no one wants to live in shame or discouragement, and we're all pursuing transformation and holiness, that makes prayer pretty relevant to our lives. But for this to happen, we must pray. Jesus is the only one who can move us from shame to love, from discouragement to security, and from sin to holiness. And he does this in prayer. Now, if even after this kind of, some of these examples and whatever, like, you still feel like, I don't know how to pray this way. How do I do this? Well, there are multiple ways, but some resources are actually, Father Matthias gave a preaching series here on prayer here at St. Pat's about a year or two ago. That's still up on YouTube, and you can look that up, especially the last video in the series. And he walks through how to pray like this. And in my own life, I found that Father Boniface Hicks has a book called Personal Prayer. And I found that to be so helpful for me in learning how to pray, especially in bringing Jesus into all of my vulnerability. So again, Father Matthias on YouTube about prayer, or Father Boniface Hicks and a book called Personal Prayer. But regardless of whether you use those resources or not, I still have a practical for you this week. And it's before Mass next Sunday, so you've got 1 week. Ask Jesus to love you in your lowest place. And then spend at least 5 minutes of your prayer letting him love you right there. Don't run from him. Don't try to fix yourself. Just sit with him and let him love you. And then also, not only that, definitely do that, please do, but then also today, in this Mass, when you come and when you receive communion, ask Jesus to come into that lowest part of your heart. Because he's coming to us in the lowly elements of bread and wine precisely so he can meet us in that lowly place of our heart and sit with us and love us and be with us. And while transformation of this place will probably take longer than 5 minutes in prayer this week and longer than receiving Jesus just in communion at today's Mass, those are 5 minutes and one communion where Jesus is able to love you in your lowest place. So let him love you and let him bring you that freedom and let him show you that you are lovable even in your lowest place.